What's happening out there, y'all? Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. Another basketball position preview show. You may have heard all of these guys that are joining me, minus me, plus Tommy Ashley, breaking down the guards, the guard position. I won't say the guard room because that would make Rob's head explode on the first edition of this. But, um, UNC basketball preview featuring the wings and combos, which, as Sherrell and I talked when we were prepping for the show, two amazing foods, wings and combos. So we're going to talk about those guys tonight. Who are these players you're talking about? Specifically, Jonathan Powell, 6'6", 180, coming in from West Virginia. Jarin Stevenson, local kid by way of Alabama, 6'8", 200. Luka Bogavač from Serbia and Montenegro, excuse me. 6'5", 200. And Caleb Wilson, the blue chip heralded prize recruit of this high school class, 6'10", 205. Guys, I tell you what, we'll shake things up. I want to give a special shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring this show. But Rob, because you're familiar to all of us, but you're a noob as far as me working with these two guys are. Let's start with Jonathan Powell, and I'll toss to you first. Rob, a little bit about Jonathan. What do you think his skill set is, and how do you think he will best fit or best be used on this UNC roster next year?
Well, that's a big question. I think he's going to be critically important for this team as a shooter. And yet, the big question for me is, can he be more than a shooter, or is he sort of what K. Tyson was supposed to be? Because if you look at Powell's stats last year, I think he shot a grand total of 25 free throws. And he played a lot of minutes. It's not like he was a part-time player. He played a ton of minutes. 25 total free throws with a lot of threes starts to look like a one-dimensional offensive player. So I think that's the one thing that they will try to have to coax out of him immediately is, if you're going to play, say, 25 minutes, 20 to 25, can you be more complete? Can you defend better and handle the ball more and get some rebounds? Because they'll need that from him. At the same time, hopefully, unlike K. Tyson, I'm not trying to take shots at Tyson, but hopefully Powell will make his threes and he'll make them against good competition. And that is where his primary value lies. However, I believe that he has more talent than that. I mean, he was a young guy. It's not like he's a fifth-year senior. And I think Powell, on that basis, probably will take a step forward with his all-around game, but he hasn't done it yet. And we'll keep coming back to this. We talked about it in the guard preview show as well. How is the offense going to be structured? Because it is possible, if you stash him on last year's team, then he hangs out in the corner a bunch, shoots a bunch of threes that way, more stationary. Probably this year, I hope this year, he will be more in motion. Hopefully the entire team will be more in motion, more ball movement, more player movement. I think that will help him become the all-around player that they need him to become.
Sean, when I'm looking at a player like that, 6'6", wing player, like Rob says, you don't want somebody that's just going to camp in the corner and shoot threes. You've got to get more out of him, especially if North Carolina wants to not have a very stationary and stagnant offense. How does he fit in your eyes with his athleticism? Is that something that you feel like can improve? Do you feel like it just wasn't used a lot when he was in Morgantown? How do you feel like he stacks up just with his basic athleticism? Would you say overly athletic? Do you feel it's a skill? Do you feel like he's average? Just lay that out for us, because I think to what Rob's saying, I think it's going to be really important.
I'd say average plus in terms of the athleticism. I think, as Rob laid out from his, and part of it was probably by design in terms of how West Virginia wanted to utilize their three-man, but camping out in the wings, taking a high, I think 70% plus of shots from three. But at the same time, you look at the 25 free throws, but then defensively, you look at the lack of impact in terms of steal percentage, blocks, defensive rating. And there are some, I'd say, warning signs in terms of, even if the offense was strictly geared to him shooting threes, there could have been, I think, other aspects that would have trended higher, some higher numbers, whether that's per game stats or analytical stats. So that is, I'd say, a red flag just in terms of that extremely athletic. I think in terms of him, we mentioned Cade Tyson, right? He's played at a high level. He has a quicker release. He has a lot better agility. And I think for him, where that athleticism plus can come out to play is if somebody comes flying at him, being quick with the one to two dribbles, pulling up for a jump shot. I think he can get to the rim, and I think he should be able to finish at the rim with the size. And he showed some flashes getting out in transition and how he did finish. I think he's more of a straight line driver, so 1 to 2 dribbles versus trying to be really creative. But I think that's where hopefully his game can mature, and that he can take his high volume sample size from last year, increase the percentage by, would love to see him at 36, 37%, but also be a little more well-rounded. So I think he does have the ability to finish. I think he does have the ability, especially if he added a little bit of strength this season, be able to create a little bit more. But I don't think he's necessarily a high flyer, but I think he does have the agility to impact basketball in different ways, both offensively and defensively.
Rob, I want to come back to you and see, how do you think he might be best utilized and I just used utilized, but from a usage standpoint, what's the best way North Carolina can deploy him? Does he need to get a certain number of shots a game? Does he need to be coming off a certain number of screens a game? What are the ways that you think, based on what you and Sean have just laid out here, that he could most likely be put forward to succeed?
I mean, I do think number one is his shooting, especially if Seth Trimble plays as many minutes as we think he will. And assuming that Trimble does not become a marquee shooter himself, I'm looking for him to improve some. But I do think Powell, in tandem with Trimble, will be important as a shooter. At the same time, I don't think it's number of shots that I'm thinking about, but I'd like to see him get more touches other than on a stationary basis. If you look at his West Virginia highlights, you'll see a lot of clips where he's just standing and waiting, and definitely that can work. That'll be important. But I also hope that he'll get some touches on the move. I mean, to Sean's point, he's more of a straight line guy. So if he's going to do things going to the rim, you probably need to give him a little bit of help. And yet he may not be someone who's perfectly suited to get a lot of the high ball screens that they've been doing the past few years. So I'll be curious, see maybe curl screen types of action where he catches the ball on the move and he catches with an advantage, and then he can make some plays. We'll get to Luka Bogavač as well, but I think that will be true for him too.
Go ahead, Sean.
And I think Rob mentioned when he first was talking about how does UNC's offense look from a movement standpoint, and I think Powell is the perfect or has the perfect potential just from an off-ball movement, given that size, the wingspan, and that the athleticism plus to be able to make a difference, cutting off the ball, catching lobs. So if he is going to be that initial, you're looking at the 3-pointer, there is stuff that he can impact the game. I think that goes to UNC putting not just him, but a lot of other players in movement to capitalize on what we think the team strength can be. And then I think the other thing, a lot of it is catch and shoot stationary, but I think from a fast break and transition perspective of him being a threat in that space of teams having to find him or the guards looking for him breaking out. So I think those are offensively areas that he can make a difference. And then, defensively, I with that size, you would want to see maybe not leaky black numbers or a leaky black lockdown, but you do need to see some improvement that way where he is impacting the game a little bit more than he did last year at West Virginia.
Talking wings and combos here on Inside Carolina, our position preview for basketball this season. I'm Joey Powell, Rob Harrington up there, Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan, the usual suspects, minus Verbal Kent. Let's move on to Jarin Stevenson. I think this is, at least from my seat and kind of hosting this thing, he is probably the biggest enigma and might be the biggest underperformer coming into this roster for UNC. Still feel like he has all the skill in the world, but for whatever reason, something just didn't click at Alabama. But now he's in Chapel Hill, and he has the skill set. He's got the measurables. I just wonder, what is that thing that needs to happen to unlock him? Sherrell, I'm coming to you first. You need to answer that question, or everything else is just completely rendered moot.
Roy Williams would say a more competitive spirit when it comes to playing the game he loves, presumably. Excuse me. I think that is the key for him, is that he's got to be into it. He's got to be engaged. He's got to be really willing to do whatever it takes for the team to win. And I think he's shown that some at Alabama. And again, I'll go back to the fact that for 2 years, he started on a team that's been better in a better conference that has achieved more. So we can't completely discount that from his resume. But I think people are just fascinated with him because of his size, because of how his recruitment went coming out of high school, because of some of the shooting ability he's shown in stretches, as particularly against Clemson in the Elite Eight. They see that and they salivate at what he could be. And unfortunately for Stevenson, that's kind of been the story on him since his freshman year in high school. It's like, if he puts it together, he could be this. And, could be can only last for so long. We're in about year 5, I think, of could be. And it's time for him to start putting it all together. And maybe a fresh start back at home near his family, playing in a place that is very familiar will provide him that opportunity. I think for this particular UNC team, he's going to have to do some blending like he did at Alabama. He's probably going to be asked to do some things that maybe are outside of his comfort zone a little bit. And by that, I really mean rebounding. Rebounding is something that, with his measurables, with his, I would say, up and down athleticism, maybe not side to side, because I don't want to get Sean mad at me because he's talked about Stevens' athleticism or lack thereof considerably over the last year with the NBA testing and everything. I think when you add all that together, he should be a better rebounder. I think he's a pretty good defender now. That's something that he can hang his hat on this UNC roster. So it's just a matter, I think, of being intentional, being intense, having that competitive spirit, and allowing all that to work together with his skills in concert with his abilities to make him a better player. And that's what the UNC staff and Hubert Davis, I think, are trying to get out of him this year.
Rob, what is the best thing about Jarin Stevenson?
I think it's his defensive versatility. I think as Sherrell already hit on it. And I think that because he has experience in college, what I think about coming in is Caleb Wilson's probably going to cannibalize some of what Jarin Stevenson could do. And so he has to play with a burst, and he hasn't done that. He's certainly not going to coast in the 25 minutes per game. So can you be really high, explosive, impactful player when you're out there? And I think that defensively, that's how he can do it, because I expect Wilson to be a little bit foul prone as a freshman. And so I think Wilson, Stevenson, for his part, can steady the team defensively. He has to rebound better. They have to get production from him that way. I'm not as sold on him as a shooter, despite his reputation out of high school. It's okay. I think he has potential to become a decent shooter, but I don't think that's his best role. There's a fine line between outside and outside. And I think he picked up some bad habits at Alabama because of the way they play. I mean, they're just going to hoist a lot of threes. And I don't
anywhere in the gym counted for them.
I don't think that was good for him. But I think what he can do on day one is to give a good defensive, versatile defensive presence, because I think there are going to be some missing pieces that way. I don't think Bogavač is probably going to be an impact defender. Vesar maybe just okay. So I think they need someone who can defend in a variety of situations, because they're going to be put into challenging circumstances with a lot of high ball screens. Who's the switcher? And I think that's where Stevenson will be really important.
I'm going to stay here for a second, Rob, because I know how Sean and Sherrell feel about this. You mentioned his defensive versatility. You see any way he can be on the floor at the same time as Vesar and Wilson? Can he guard the three straight up?
I wouldn't like to see that unless it's a hinky matchup, and the person he's guarding is like Pitt, like a bully ball team that doesn't have shooters. And yes, otherwise I wouldn't want to see him chasing guys, side to side, getting rubbed off ball screens and stuff. I don't think he has that kind of lateral mobility, to Sean's point. But maybe occasionally, but hopefully not a whole lot of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to see it a ton. Something I would like to see more of is your +1 column that you've been writing for IC. It's been a nice wake up to see the last couple of weeks since you've been here. I think it's a good, refreshing read, and want to make sure that the folks who are listening to this show are checking that out. Does it drop twice a week or once a week, or is it going to be up and down depending on when you've got something grinding your gears? You tell me when folks can look to expect it.
Tuesday and Thursday, unless I'm cranky, and then all bets are off. But generally speaking, Tuesday and Thursday.
All right, we'll wait and see if that number changes based on how many clouds you're yelling at that day. All right, next player that we want to try to get to. Again, we're looking here at combos and wings. Partial to the pizzeria cracker, if I'm being honest, and then some usually a Cajun rub or something that's got a little bit of Cuban heat is my preference for both combos and wings. But Sean, Luka Bogavač, I think he might be the biggest positively intriguing player on this roster. One, because I think he came in late. Two, because he's coming directly from being a pro player overseas. I think there's just so much intrigue around this guy. But more importantly, as we kind of peel back the layers a little bit, I think he could really be somewhat of a Swiss Army knife, or I guess a Serbian Montenegrin Army knife, if I'm going to be appropriate, in how he's going to help this roster. Sean, first things first, Luka Bogavač, 6'5", 200. Again, he has played in the Adriatic League for a little bit, has a lot of really refined skill for somebody coming in to play what would ostensibly be his first college ball. Just tell us what you think jumps out at you about his overall skill set.
I think from an overall skill set, really staying on the offensive side of the ball, one is the shooting. Last year, he shot 40% from behind the three-point line in a very competitive league. So I think a lot of the questions last year around the team came from the outside shooting. And I think a lot of the questions as we were going through the transfer portal came around outside shooting, which they addressed with certain players. But I think his ability there, was a high volume outside shooter overseas, but also, going back a few months when we were trying to focus on these transfers and what do they do, outside of their main strength, what else can they do or how else can they contribute? And I think his ability as a ball handler or a kind of a secondary ball handler will be really helpful. So you could almost have slotted him into the guard discussion, I think, as he can operate almost as a 2, but we'll call him a 2-3 or 3-2 for these purposes. So I think without a true point guard on this team, and he's definitely not a visionary when it comes to passing, but I do think from a ball handling perspective, he can help with that. I think his ability to score off the dribble, more from a pull-up perspective, doesn't have the most athleticism. So I think at the rim, he will struggle in terms of finishing, especially in a crowd. But he's going to be 22, so think of him as a first-year senior for the most part. He has professional experience. He proved he could shoot it at a high level, being the go-to guy. But he also proved he was more than just a stationary three-point shooter. That he does have a little bit of wiggle to his game. And I mean, I think you can go back 2 years when he had close to 30 against USC in a scrimmage. So, as we're going through this, I think to me, if we were just talking about Powell, Stevenson, and Wilson, it would be a good group to talk about. But I think that late addition of Bogavač just provides that much more versatility where, here's a shooter, here's a ball handler, he can play the 3, and it can allow for Wilson and Powell to come in. If people aren't functioning, as well as Stevenson, if people aren't functioning on a high night, having just that 4 that we're talking about instead of 3, I think is going to be one of the most important aspects to this team. But for Bogavač, definitely the most intriguing. I think we saw him as a high usage option for a team that did not make the playoffs in a competitive league. So how does he fit in? Probably still be high usage, but having to fit in around other talented players, I think will be the main question, as well as just adoption to the college game versus an overseas professional league.
Sherrell, do you think the fact that he's got some pro experience will help him make that transition like Sean's talking about?
I don't see how it can hurt, honestly, considering he's played against grown men for some time now, and he understands, I think, what it takes to be a professional. He understands kind of what the rigors of the ACC day in, day out will look like. So I don't see how it could hurt UNC. And as Sean said, I think he's I don't want to say perfect, but he's exactly what they needed. When we were not quite doing the postmortem on the transfer portal class, it was like, well, they got improved shooting, they got taller, they got more versatile. But when they lost Ian Jackson and RJ Davis, it was like, well, do they have a guy who can go get them a basket when they really need it? And I do think he is going to function as such. At least that is the goal. Whether or not he can do it at a consistent level, we'll see once the season starts. But I think he has that ability, and I think he's going to be given the opportunity to fill that role for UNC this season. So, again, I don't see how it can hurt. I think it's a huge positive, both on the court as far as his play, and then off the court, to some degree as in a leadership role, because he's got more experience against good basketball players than most of the rest of the Carolina basketball team, and that's something you can't really find in the portal necessarily. Someone who's played against not just college players but professional players for multiple years.
Grown ass men, for lack of a better term. Sean, I want to ask you as well. This is something that I've always wanted to see North Carolina do more often, and that's to be able to deploy guys based on their skill set. With Hubert Davis having a kind of a shorter rotation, we never really get to see guys used situationally. And I think when he first came in, we thought we were going to see a little more of that NBA style of how guys were getting put into the game and what situations they were kind of being asked to excel in. Do you think there's some situation like Sherrell's mentioned that he can just be the guy that goes and gets them a bucket? Do you think he can be that alpha when there's a shot clock situation or even a game clock situation where they've got to say, hey, need you to do something, not go full, ISO for 30 seconds and then get something up. But do you think he's got enough skill and enough experience to be able to take advantage of what he sees and what his opponent is giving him in a must-have basket situation?
I think that just general question, as UNC starts to figure out their roles and strengths, and as they continue to grow this year, of identifying who is that player. I think each game can be a little different, but who is the alpha? Right now it'd probably be Seth Trimble, just from his experience, but maybe he's not the one you want having the ball unless he's catching on the move, or it's more of a fast break type of situation. So I do think, just going back to that pick and roll ability and his ability to operate as a lead guard or secondary ball handler, puts him in that top tier of who you might want based on how people are performing. I don't think you're going to see, going back to the Florida game with Ian Jackson, where he was just taking, ISO situations and nobody could really do anything with him, just because he had his handle and his ability to create for himself and create space was just so advanced. So I don't think you're going to get that, given maybe I'd say average athleticism, but I think from the experience, shooting, probably a lot of confidence, I think that could lend itself to being that type of guy. I think the main thing also, just to put yourself in that situation, has to be, you don't want to be a deficit on the defensive end. And I think, once again, he played at a high level. He guarded, older, stronger, 2s and 3s throughout the year that had played at a very high level from a collegiate perspective. So you don't need him to be a lockdown defender, but you don't want him to be somebody that people are trying to get in certain situations and either ISO or look to get quicker guards on. So I think as long as he's holding his own defensively, he can put himself in a position to be on the floor and to potentially be that guy to get that last shot. But at the same time, it's going to be kind of an interesting mix of just the trade-offs that each player has, and how does that come just from a confidence perspective, versus, I think last year, hey, RJ needs to be the guy, or I know Elliott hit some big shots, but it was because they were looking for RJ a lot. So I think having different options will be the best path forward for them.
Rob, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I spent some time on him this weekend, and trying to really dig into his game more. And one thing that stood out to me, I'd had the thought originally, like he has short strides, which some people, you might really prefer a longer stride. Like Drake Powell is beautifully long, loping stride. Bogavač does not have that. He's a short strider. And yet the thing that stood out to me that I really like, certainly he's not an elite athlete, as Sean said, but I do like that he can be full speed and stop and go right into a jump shot. And so I think part of his role will depend on how fast they play. I'm sure that Hubert Davis will say that they're going to play fast. Now, they say that every year, and what they've been doing is they've been getting slower over the course of the season. If they are going to play up tempo, for the entire year, especially, then I think he'll be really important, because he's the one who would take that pull-up 15-footer that you might hate that shot. And yet it's really important if you're going to play up tempo sometimes and you don't have a lot of elite finishers. And if you have some big guys who can run, which they will have, and you have more of an offensive rebounding presence, which they should have, you can live with a shot like that. And I think Bogavač is the one to take them. So I look at him as a perimeter finisher, finishing away from the rim, and a connector. It's such an abused word. It's probably right there with like room. That drives me crazy. But I do think that he serves that role of, if he's able to hit some shots, will draw a lot of attention. And you're talking about someone who's played high-level basketball for a really long time. Even if he isn't a Kendall Marshall-esque maestro as a passer, he'll just sort of have a good court sense of where the ball should go. I've been impressed with his sort of sense of spacing, and that's really important to a Hubert team. So I think he has a lot of potential to be, to call his own number, but also to get some of these proverbial hockey assists. I think he'll be important that way too.
I think one
thing real quick on that. I think another thing, Rob, of his ability is probably not getting all the way to the rim, but I think getting into that, and maybe not a Cormac Ryan-esque pull-up jumper, but pretty strong. But I think getting into that 8 to 12 foot range as well, whether it's him shooting or then, as you said, being able to dish off, I think that's going to be another area where he can find opportunities, whether that's early in the game in transition or late when they do need a basket.
Yeah, I'm thinking, his ability to start and stop that Rob's talking about, that feels like something that's hard to guard if North Carolina is indeed in transition, right? When you've got the ability to just stop on a dime and let it fly, and in rhythm that you can hit a mid-range shot, that's almost impossible to guard. And with the height that North Carolina has this year, getting that ball up on the glass might not be the worst thing in the world. When you're talking about, being a connector, and I know you didn't want to use that word, Rob, but I'm thinking about how Brady Manick was for the Final Four team a couple of years ago, in a sense that he's not necessarily facilitating a break or, lead passing a guy 80 feet down the floor, but he is making sure the ball's not getting stuck, and he's reversing it at the right time, and he's knowing when to make an extra pass, and he's knowing when to let the ball go into the paint. I think that's kind of something that I've seen on some of Bogavač's tape that I think might be what you were alluding to, though I want to stop short of putting words in your mouth. Another thing that you guys are all talking about, Luka Bogavač, something I kept hearing is just how versatile he is. And I'd say he's almost as versatile as a selection at Johnny T-shirt. Almost. Because we know, if we're talking about the preeminence of versatility and selection to be your haberdasher of UNC gear, that's Johnny T-shirt. JohnnyT-shirt.com, or the storefront right on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Premium subscribers to Inside Carolina know they get that extra 10% off if they use the code found on the message boards. Go do that. And while I'm thinking about message boards and all that goodness, if you have not yet, please follow us on over. Join us at our new home. We've moved on up to the east side. We finally got our piece of the pie right here on On3. We want you guys to join us. You'll have to resubscribe, but it's $1. $1. I could even pry $1 out of Sherrell McMillan's cold, dead hands if I had to. You need to do that. Come be a part of the family. We love all of you guys joining us. We want our subscribers to still get the best coverage of UNC sports that's out there. And that's by making sure that you subscribe, become a premium member at Inside Carolina on 3. There will probably be some national ads that drop in the podcast feed, but in the video feed, we're just going to keep talking. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. Sean Moran, Rob Harrington, and Sherrell McMillan are joining me. The last guy that we need to talk about in this Combos Wings preview show is the one with all the pomp and circumstance, the one with all the panache, one with all the verve around him, the one whose vibes are immaculate, Caleb Wilson. So I'm going to let all of you guys talk about this guy, because I think there's more to talk about here than probably anybody else. That's not a slight to the rest of the guys, but he's clearly the highest rated, most heralded player on this roster. Sherrell, you followed Caleb Wilson since UNC first got involved with his recruitment. First things first, if you've got to tell me one thing that he's going to do the first time you see him play, what's that thing going to be?
He's going to play hard every time. I think the first time we saw him, probably 4 years ago, he was a sophomore and playing against Drake Powell, who was a junior at the time, and just asking a few people, around the building, like, "Well, tell us about this kind of scrawny looking kid who's, 15 and still developing." And they're like, "He goes hard all the time, every game." So I think no matter what happens, how well he shoots, how well he doesn't shoot, or rebound or foul trouble or whatever, he's going to give effort. And Roy Williams always talked about, and Hubert Davis has talked about, you shouldn't have to coach effort. Well, they're not going to have to do it with him. That's going to be clear from day one. I think you've probably already seen it in the numerous videos and social media posts from the UNC accounts, and even ones that Caleb has put out on his own. But he's a fun, laid back, goofy kid off the court, and a very intense, serious basketball person on it. And I think that's kind of the perfect fit for UNC at this very moment.
I don't know that you'll ever find a coach anywhere that will turn away a kid that's got an amazing motor like that. I don't know if motor's on Rob's list of banned words, but when you think about intensity and playing hard, I think about Tyler Hansbrough and the fact that he had a motor that just ran at red line almost all the time. Rob, I want to throw to you. I mean, getting back into this kind of, analysis, diving into players' games, what's something that you see from Caleb Wilson you feel like that he does better than anybody else that he's going to see this year?
I mean, I would even take it a step back. I'm about fun, and I think he's going to be fun to watch. I think he's a fun player, and everyone is going to really appreciate that. I think straight away. The comparison I will make, not so much as a skill or size profile, but I think what he can do would be the freshman Jerry Stackhouse, because Stackhouse on that team, it's a defending national champion. I think they came out in high socks. He and Wallace did. I mean, it was Western Kentucky game maybe, and he tried to dunk. Was a very wild attempt and he missed it, but it was so much frenetic energy. He was just bringing this this pop to the court straight away and making the most of his minutes. And we just talked about this in the Jarin Stevenson context. Now Wilson will be playing big minutes, presumably. And I think that he has, to the point that he has the type of motor that will enable him to play with that type of pop for extended minutes. And it's one thing to do that over the course of 8 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, quite another to translate it to 25 to 30. I think he's assuming that he stays out of foul trouble, which is not an assumption that I'm really willing to make. I think that's going to happen some. You just have to live with it. And he's not just going to be energetic and chicken head cut off type stuff, but he's going to give them things they've been missing on the offensive glass, a physical finisher. Hopefully, I think once he adjusts to the rigors of the college game, he'll be a physical finisher, lively legs, good size. Someone who can get a loose ball, which was an issue they had throughout last season, that they just couldn't come up with a loose ball. I think he'll be that guy. He gets the loose ball. He's the one who makes these in-between type plays just by virtue of effort and size and athleticism, and it will be fun to watch. So I'm so excited about him, and I recognize that he's not totally polished yet. He's probably not going to be Kevin Durant. But I do expect him to show a versatile offensive game. He's not deprived of skills. I just think it's the other stuff that will stand out first, and everyone will gravitate to watching him straight away.
The other thing with Caleb, everybody wants to be the man, and they want everything that comes with being the guys. And I don't know if they have the work ethic or the shoulders or the mental capacity, honestly, to handle all of that. And I believe just from knowing the people around him, his upbringing, how he's handled it already, that Caleb has that. He has it and he wants it. He wants to be the person to carry the weight of the program on his shoulders. Now, granted, it's a lot heavier than I think it's been in the past, considering how the last few years have went, but he welcomes that challenge and doesn't shy away from it. And that in itself is something that I think Carolina just hasn't had in recent years. It's nothing against any of the other freshmen, but they've been or the high profile freshmen or high profile transfers, really sans, I'd say, Harrison Ingram, they haven't had that gravitas. They haven't had that infectiousness that, gets into the locker room and changes, how his teammates play. That hasn't happened a ton. And with Caleb, it's there and it's clear and it's obvious, and you can see it already again, just through the small amount of stuff that we've seen via practice videos and everything. And that's something that's one of those X factors that you just can't account for when a player of his age and his ability can already like galvanize a locker room into forming around his will almost. And I know that sounds very strong, but it's going to be a fun, energetic, serious locker room. And I think he has a large part of that just because, the players aren't dumb. They know that he's got, a New Balance deal. They know he's a multimillionaire. They know that he's the one getting all the praise and accolades and attention prior to the season. But they also see him in the locker room as, oh, that's just Caleb. And when you're not in a different tier from everyone else in the locker room, you can bring them up to your tier, so to speak. And I think Wilson has that ability.
All right, so I'm going to come in and just harsh everybody's mellow a little bit since you guys are getting way too excited. Sean, what's something that concerns you about Caleb Wilson's game or the expectations that are on him or the sort of way he's going to be used early on in this season?
Let me jump in before Sean goes. Let me jump in. I'm not saying he's going to be perfect and he's going to be an amazing player. I'm saying that because of his off the court stuff, because of his mentality and the way he works, and his just his overall ability to compartmentalize and also to carry the weight of the programs he's been on before on his shoulders, then I think he's going to be okay. That's all I meant.
All right, so going back to putting words in Sherrell's mouth. No, I'm kidding. Sean, but what's the one thing that concerns you still, independent of Sherrell's clarification there? What's the one thing that concerns you about Caleb Wilson and what's going to be expected of him and what the team's going to need of him? And it could be a skill deficiency, but I'll let you take that.
Well, one, really excited. I think when he did commit, did an article and a video that just showed his strengths and weaknesses together. And I think when we did the commitment video, not that we were negative, but maybe just more trying to temper expectations. And I think for me, shooting is going to be that question mark for him. Going back a year, shot low 20s in AAU play. I think the positive thing over that year, it seems like he has gotten stronger in the lower body just from being able to have a stronger base and getting more power from that lower body in the high school season and some of the spring and summer clips that we've seen. I think will help that a lot. High school wise, it did seem he improved his 3-point shooting. Granted, the competition wasn't great, but I think more looking at the form, it seemed to have gotten better. But I say all that, how does he score and what is he contributing? So high energy, he's going to be athletic. He can attack the basket. I think he can, we've talked about it a lot. I think he'll be able to attack in motion. So when he gets movement and attacking, trying to get a step on the defender. But if he isn't able to shoot, or if teams are playing off of him, that will eliminate some of his ability to use that athleticism. It will kind of start to clog up the floor a little bit. So don't need him as a 40% three-point shooter by any stretch of the imagination, but need him to be confident, whether that is from three or from mid-range, to be able to utilize his strengths and that size and athleticism to his advantage.
We haven't done this yet, but I want to try just because, again, with all the heraldry that comes with Caleb Wilson's arrival in Chapel Hill, what do y'all expect out of him? Like, give me some stat numbers, and they don't all have to be, points, rebounds, assists. They don't have to be minutes per game. Just tell me something you think right now you fully expect him to be able to do, as soon as the first real game happens. Rob, you go.
I'm going to go with this is a little empirical, but I'm going to go with offensive efficiency of 108 to 110. Pretty good for a freshman, but not elite, and a rebounding profile that looks more like a Roy Williams player.
So dude, this is getting a lot of offensive glass. Yeah, a lot of offensive glass.
I mean, I think he'll step it up. I think he'll give them that bounce that they've been missing, and he'll bring it naturally. I know Hubert has talked about increasing that too. I think he'll be critically important to that objective, and he's probably why Hubert's making those comments at all.
I think one of the things I remember most about James Michael McAdoo, and I don't even remember what his statistics said about rebounding, but I feel like his first year in Chapel Hill, he got a lot of really clutch rebounds and some emphatic putbacks off of rebounds just out of nowhere, which seemed like sleepy athleticism. Sherrell, what's something you expect we will see out of Caleb Wilson statistically his first year? You don't have to get as granular as Rob did, though I appreciate the empiricalness of that. I'll ask you the same thing, Sherrell. Give me something you think just immediately stepping on the court he's going to do.
Well, immediately, I think he'll be a great defender. I think he could challenge to be on the All ACC defensive team this year, just for a lot of the reasons we already mentioned. But from a stat profile, I'll go with like there'll be a game where he has, let's say 3 steals, 3 blocks, and 8 rebounds. Like he'll have a game like that. Maybe he'll get closer to 5 and 5 and 5 or something like that. But he's going to contribute those extra things that give Carolina extra possessions, blocks, steals, and like Rob said, offensive rebounds. So I would say those are the things to look for that I have no doubt he'll be able to do no matter how he shoots or anything else like that.
All right, Sean, same thing. Nobody's mentioned points yet. I'm trying to think, is he going to be a garbage man in a sense that his athleticism gets him a couple of putbacks every game just because he's in the right spot? But you don't have to go there if you don't want to. I'm just telling you what's kicking around the host's head right now.
Yeah, well, I think kind of following on Rob's just from an efficiency standpoint, I do think getting to the line, so free throw rate should be high, just with his ability to, whether it's offensive rebounding or catching the ball on the move. I don't think it'll probably be as high as Seth Trimble's, but I think he should be getting to the line. And then I think both from a rebounding perspective, offensively, you should have Vesar, who's a strong offensive rebounder, but if he can be complemented by Caleb, I think that can almost get you back a little bit to the Roy Williams identity and those extra possessions, which did prove so critical when UNC made their run last year towards the end of the season. In terms of the stat profile, you could look last year and the second leading scorers were around 11.6, 11.7, down to Drake Powell, first round draft pick, who was, closer to 8. So, when you say these, so I'll just say 10 and 6, which when you say it doesn't say, oh, that doesn't sound great, but I think there are going to be games where he's going to be 13 to 14 and 7. But I think there's going to be some fluctuations, and I think with his team's depth, you won't need him to be at that 14 and 7, 14 and 8 every game. That would be great if he did, and I think it would cement himself in that top 10 status, and UNC having a strong freshman to talk about and boast. But I would say 10 and 5 as kind of a stat profile that we're looking at the end of the year.
All right, before we get out of here, I'm sitting here trying to formulate how I want to pose this next question. So allow me to workshop this aloud before I throw it to you guys. I'm trying to think of a way we could measure the 4 players that we've talked about tonight versus their usage and who's going to have the most impact out of these 4. So I don't know what that metric is called. I don't think it's efficiency. But if there is a term for it, let me know. But I want to ask you guys, with respect to how much they're used, and whether it's minutes per game or how much the offense actually considers them, which of these players will have the biggest offensive impact to North Carolina's team offense this season? Sean, go.
I'm going to go with Luka on that one, just because I think before he was signed, there were those question marks of, are you starting Powell at the 3? Are you starting Stevenson? If this happens, so there's a lot more questions. So I think with him, he's going to have the biggest impact offensively just from his shooting ability and ball handling ability. But I think Wilson, maybe not from a points perspective, but I just think with the things that Wilson can do athletically and at the rim will also provide from offensive perspective kind of a high impact.
Yeah, by the way, after this show, if you guys figure out what this statistic is called, let me know. My non-mathematical brain might be hindering my own progress here. Sherrell, same question.
To be different, I will go with Caleb Wilson on this one. You did say offensively, and I wanted to add defense in there to make the picture complete. But
call an audible. It's fine. Call an audible. It can be offense and defense.
But you can make an argument for Caleb on the offensive end too, just because of some of the things that Rob and Sean have talked about with him, in that he's likely going to be going to the free throw line. We know he attacks the boards with rigor. We know that he has his shot doesn't look terrible, so you would expect that he'll make some threes. It might not be a great percentage or anything, but he'll make some threes. So he'll have a profile. He'll have the minutes available more than likely that he can make a significant impact, a material impact on the offense. So I'll go him for those reasons because again, he's going to steal Carolina a few extra possessions. You would expect him to be very efficient inside the paint, just because of his athleticism. And then if he can knock down his free throws at a decent rate, I mean that's all about efficiency. Is offensive rebounds, free throws, shots close to the basket. That is what efficiency is, and I think he can shine that way. So I'll go him just for the sake of being different. But Luka is going to be very important. I think we all agree.
All right, Rob, bring us home.
Yeah, Bogavač for me too. I think, though, I hope that he's not much higher than everyone else because that would be a red flag for this team. What you don't want is to have a lot of stagnating possessions and the ball comes to him with 8 seconds left, like it would with RJ Davis, and then he has to make something out of nothing. I think if his usage is too high, if he takes too high a percentage of the team's shots, that doesn't bode well. For me, I do think that he probably this group would lead them because he will get some of those opportunities late in half court possessions. I think he's more likely to get a touch than anyone else among this group of players. I do think that he'll be important in transition, which we already talked about. I definitely take the point on Wilson that if they're playing really well, I think you'd see his usage be higher because I think that means we talked about this with the guards. That means they're playing more vertically, which is, I think, a real key for this team. And Wilson's going to get his stuff. Like the more he does, it's probably going to be closer to the rim as opposed to the side-to-side sort of affliction they've had over the past few years for the most part. I think if Wilson's getting a lot of touches and his usage is high, that is something I would take as an encouraging sign.
All right, boys. Before we close, last minute thoughts. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that y'all feel like is incredibly important, or that you guys feel like we've just totally glossed over? Because I'll admit, I hear at home all the time that I messed up. So if I've missed something tonight, I'm gonna ask that you guys throw it out there so that our audience can get it. Sherrell, what have I missed?
Well, there's a chance that one of these four guys that we're talking about doesn't play a lot. If you look at Hubert Davis's history and how he handles things, last year the bench played about 30% of the available minutes. And so I guess it's like, well, you expect all four of these guys to be big time contributors, but which one falls out of the rotation for whatever reason, I think is something that we have to consider. Like they all have their strengths, but I guess which weakness is going to keep one of these four guys out. And I really think you can take it to either Powell or Stevenson. Which one of those two, which weakness of those two is going to keep them out of the rotation? And that's something to watch.
Well, and that makes me immediately think of like which of their weaknesses causes them or causes the staff to lose trust in them, because we know that's, as Sherrell said before, that's the currency that Hubert Davis deals in incredibly heavily. Sean, same thing.
Well, maybe just taking Sherrell's point, because I think that is a thing with a lot of the versatility this team has on the guards and the forwards. You can't play everybody, and some of that is going to be a game by game decision. But I think when you are looking at Stevenson and Powell on the flip side of what's going to keep them on the bench, what's going to keep them on the court. So what are they contributing, or what is that factor that is earning Hubert's trust? And I think for Stevenson, I've been pretty hard on him in terms of what, I think Joey talked about like skill set and measurables. I think people look at him and see like, hey, that's what a basketball player should look like, but he doesn't have the athleticism or the strength or skill set to really develop into that. So is it going to be, from a defensive rebounding perspective, or his ability to play at a 4 or 5, or to Rob's point, in pick and rolls kind of be a difference maker in that situation? So I think it's identifying offensively and defensively what can he do well in short minutes. Same with Powell, who I think has more opportunity from his scoring ability, but making sure he's bringing something on both sides of the table. So to me, for those guys that we weren't answering as like who's going to have the most measurable impact, but for them, who's going to have the most measurable impact in a smaller window, I think is going to be really important because, once again, these skill sets do provide if somebody gets in foul trouble, if somebody gets injured, something like there's a lot of ways this team can go, which is important, but then how are they contributing in those ways? So to me, that's going to be the most interesting for a Stevenson Powell type of player.
All right, Rob, last chance for an add-on.
Yeah, I would just say too, I think over the course of the season, we'll be talking about what even constitutes success for Caleb Wilson, because it's happening on parallel tracks. On the one hand, you look at the value that he's adding to the team, which may or may not show up statistically. I think it will somewhat, but to Sean's point, it may not always, certainly from a scoring point of view. It could or it could not. That's one track. The other track is what is happening with his NBA stock. And I think we here, and everyone in the fan base and everyone else will sort of have to keep those things in mind, because one could bleed into the other. I mean, I'm totally okay with Caleb Wilson having a good, not great statistical year, and like Drake Powell sort of recovering his draft status once they get to see him in workouts in a different situation beyond what this team needs him to do. On the other hand, that there's even more pressure on Hubert to get Caleb out of there, and in high draft pick. I mean, the program needs someone like that, and then they need another one, and they need another one. They need someone to go high in the lottery, and so there is some pressure beyond what he does on the court. And so I'm as we go through our post games and our other shows, that's something we'll sort of keep tabs on, because I think it's important to contextualize what's happening, not just what he's doing on the court. What does it mean for his stock, and what does his stock mean? Doubling back to Carolina and Hubert, I think that will be, hopefully it will all overlap nicely, but I think there could be some points of tension in there from time to time. That's just something to track as we go.
Yeah, that potential inflection or friction or what have you will absolutely be a great undertone to see over and over throughout this season. And I'm glad you brought it up this early, Rob, because I think it's important to see, and the value of getting a guy in high lottery again from North Carolina. I don't think that can be understated. Fellas, I appreciate it. It's been a fun discussion, a round table, if you will. I know there's just the four of us, but I'm glad that we got to break down the combos and wings. Now I'm hungry all of a sudden, but appreciate the insight you guys bring. Again, this is the second of three of these that we're going to do. The last one will obviously be looking at the post players. That'll be coming to you very, very soon as well. So make sure you've got the Inside Carolina podcast subscription button turned on. You'll get all this stuff immediately. But until next time, I want to give a special thank you to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring, to John Siegley for producing, and to my three guests tonight, Rob Harrington, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. You guys are the best. We appreciate you being here. And until next time, to our listeners, I'm just Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. We will talk to you guys very, very soon. Take care.